Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for an educational event. The topic being affordable housing. Before we get into it, I wanted to ask a few questions. Raise your hand if you're watching the Mets tonight. Anyone? No? Okay, that was a joke. I'm sorry. Gotta break the ice somehow. Raise your hand if you own a home. All right, half the crowd. Raise your hand if you're a local business owner or know a local business owner that had staff shortages this summer. Every single hand went up. Raise your hand if you don't think your kids will be able to live in our community. Wow. Raise your hand if you think young professionals, emergency workers, teachers, government workers, deserve to live in the community they work and serve. All right, I just wanted to get some interactive in this. Now, some of you may be wondering why a 25-year-old is up here talking about housing. Simply put, I, like 99% of my friends, live at home. Why? Is it to save money? No, I do that, but that's not the reason. It's because I have no other options. You may be thinking to yourself, what could a 25-year-old tell you about housing that you don't already know? Well, according to the town of East Hampton, the single parent percentage from 2010 to 2020 has gone down 25%. Did you know that 72% of all renter-occupied households spend more than 35% of their income on housing costs, compared to the national average of 40%? That's a 32% difference. And the county average of 48.2%. And did you know that you will not be taxed at all under the CPF unless you are buying a second home over $1 million. Zero extra taxes for 99.99% of us in this room. Zero. I'll admit, I've never had a mortgage. I'm not a realtor. But I'm a passionate individual that has recognized that the community that raised me has aggressively changed. All in the time period of my lifetime, from 1997, back when there used to be ma and pa stores downtown, local stores. Now you have Cartier, etc. I'm here because I want future versions of me to grow up in the same community that I did. I want young people to know that they have the option of living in the community that we went to school and were raised in. You all have the opportunity to vote on something that you will never receive credit for. I want to read this quote from the 33rd President of the United States, Harry Truman. It is amazing what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. My only goal for you tonight is to leave as an informed voter in this upcoming election, a month and 1 day away. Now, you guys have the opportunity to vote on something that could profoundly change the history of our community. I don't care if you vote yes or no. I'm not here to tell you that. I'm here to inform you as a voter. If not us, then who? Who will address the housing crisis? Welcome to the Community Housing Forum. I'm Matt Lownes. Thank you. Now, first of all, I'd love to introduce my panelists here. Right here next to me, I have East Hampton Town Supervisor Peter Van Scoyoc. Thank you for coming. Next to him, of course, I have Southampton Town Supervisor Jay Schneiderman. And then, of course, I have County Legislator Bridget Fleming. And then, of course, I have New York State Assemblyman Fred Thiele, who came up with this bill back in '97, I believe, and tried to get it passed every year since. So he deserves the biggest round of applause. Sorry, nothing against you, Senator Palumbo, but Fred's a legend. And of course, we have New York State Senator Anthony Palumbo. Thank you so much for coming, all of you. Now I'm going to read something from the town of East Hampton about how we got here. It's just a short little passage, and then we'll finally break it on to the panelists. The creation of affordable housing opportunities is essential to the economic and social viability of the East Hampton community. Rapid growth in real estate prices, conversion of rental and affordable houses to vacation homes, short-term rentals, and luxury developments, and the impacts of the pandemic-driven relocations have further reduced a waning supply of affordable housing and rental opportunities. Longtime residents are forced to leave the area. We can't deny that. Businesses cannot find or retain employees. Also can't deny that. Emergency services cannot recruit volunteers, and traffic has increased as workers must commute from elsewhere. And many residents are forced to live in illegal or substandard conditions. So I really want to start off tonight, and starting off with Peter. How did we get here?
Well, Matt, this is something that's been an issue for decades, really, and East Hampton has strived to deal with this issue of housing affordability for decades. We have, I think, the most affordable housing units per capita of any town on Long Island, but clearly it's not enough, especially under these circumstances. This has been a long time coming, and when I first moved to town, I was newlywed, and my wife and I moved 7 times in 2.5 years between winter rentals and little shacks wherever, trying to save money to get a foot in the door. And at that time, we were able to actually purchase land, and I built the house. I don't think that's attainable now for any working person relying on the local economy. The prices have just skyrocketed. We compete with an economy that's outside of our own. And so, that's why, we've declared all hands on housing. We have all 5 of our board members working on every aspect of this issue. We're not going to be able to build our way out of this. We have to have a multifaceted approach, and we've been working on it. I just want to take an opportunity to also thank LTV for holding this forum. And thank you, Matt, for your passion on this topic. This is your future, as well as many other young people in our town. And I want to especially thank Fred Thiele, who's worked so hard for us and given us this opportunity to have this community housing fund referendum.
And not to skip Jay, Bridget, I would like Fred to go next with his thoughts, just because he is the architect of this, so to speak.
Yeah, well, the question on how we got here, it's economics. It's supply and demand. If you went to college and took an economics 101 course, it's supply and demand. And, I also think that, the innate beauty of this area and the closeness that we have to the New York metropolitan area and Wall Street are also factors that contribute to those economics. So I say supply and demand. The supply side, if you went back to the 1980s when this started to become a problem, when Judith Hope was supervisor and the town was building things like Olympic Heights and some of those different projects, some of the first housing projects, we've increased the supply of housing from the 1980s until now, pretty substantially. The population of the town of East Hampton was probably somewhere in the 17 or 18,000 range, year-round population. Now it's 28,000. So the supply is there. It's been the demand. And the demand for housing, in a simple couple of sentences, is that the ability of those who are seeking second homes to outbid and outcompete those who live here and who are local, who are just trying to buy a first home. It is the fact that there's such a demand for second homes here that it is that demand that has outcompeted local families' ability to keep up with the prices that second homeowners are willing to pay. And it is simply that demand for second homes. In some ways, we're a victim of our own success. Yep. We wanted to preserve what was best about this area. We have. And whether it's farmland or wetlands or beach accesses or our watersheds, but it has also been that those folks that want a second home here can outcompete. Just a couple of other additional statistics. Shinnecock Canal, east of Montauk, in my assembly district, more than 2/3 of all the dwelling units are second homes now.
Wow.
A perfect example of this you saw and the pandemic has accelerated this.
Yes.
In the pandemic, I don't know how many local folks that are around my age that owned a house here on the South Fork who just looked at the values, decided to sell, and took the proceeds, built a house in Florida or North Carolina or some other place, got twice the house for half the price, and had money for their retirement. Now, who did they sell to? They didn't sell to another local family. Nope. They sold to somebody who was looking for a second home during the pandemic. So, you've got more dwelling units, but when houses are on the market, it is that demand for second homes that have just left local families, the people that are in the volunteer fire departments, nurses at the hospital, teachers at the school, 25-year-olds who are working at LTV, overwhelming their ability to be able to compete in that market. And that is why we need to do something that creates policies where local families, those who grew up here, who should have a choice about being able to stay here, or those that work here, where people can live where they work, and people who grew up here can stay here. And that is what we're trying to do and trying to assist with this referendum this year.
Thank you. And as a reminder to the audience, once we get past this part, you can come up at any time and ask your questions for the panelists. I think that's very important to have the audience engagement. Tell them your stories, tell them your thoughts, because this is one of the last chances. Jay, if you'd like to go and talk about Southampton's perspective, that would be great.
Well, let me try to answer a little bit the question you just asked.
Of course.
I think Peter and Fred shed a lot of light on it. But if you don't know how we got here, it's pretty tough to craft solutions to solve the problem. So I think it's a really important starting question and fundamental question. And I have kind of an interesting perspective. I represented East Hampton as town supervisor and legislator, so combined like 16 years. And now I'm supervisor of the town of Southampton. And when I first got elected supervisor, as much as I had all these issues I wanted to work on, it was really clear that affordable housing was a crisis then. And this was, around 2000. I remember Y2K, right? So
I don't.
That was the big problem, Y2K. But Y2K wasn't the big problem. But housing turned out to be a major problem, as a lot of the people I knew were leaving the community. And I could ask today, how many, you asked a bunch of questions in the beginning, but how many people could afford to purchase the home they live in, or the year-round community? And most people will tell you they can't. Yeah. That delta between what housing costs are and what wages are has gotten so wide that it's impossible, right? There was a while where people, worked 2 or 3 jobs and tried to close that gap. These communities were sustainable years ago, right? The workforce lived within the communities. They were affluent communities, and it was expensive, south of the highway. And most of the workforce lived north of the highway, and they commuted a short distance to work. But pretty much everybody that was needed to service that second home industry lived within the community. Montauk's a little bit different pattern, But that was the case for Southampton town as well. People lived north of the highway, so places like North Sea or Noyak or
Yep.
Springs, that's where the workers lived. Those areas have gotten also out of range. They've gentrified, the numbers are out of reach for most people. That second home economy that Fred was talking about, out-competing. So now the commuting pattern isn't north-south, it's west to east, and particularly west of the Shinnecock Canal, and that is getting further and further, right? So Hampton Bays and East Quogue and Flanders, they were sort of the new enclaves of the working
Yeah.
class. Now those areas are getting expensive, and so now it's even further than that. So like Yaphank and Patchogue, Riverhead, and that's making life complicated for everyone. The people who commute, the businesses who are trying to find employees and can't survive. If they have to increase the wages too much, they won't be able to stay in business. The towns who have to retain a workforce and fill vacancies. So, and all the traffic that people complain about. So we were once sustainable, and it worked. Now we're completely out of balance. And the supply, as Fred talked about, it's a limited supply.
Yeah.
And we're competing with a lot of people who want it. We're victims in some ways of our own success. We've done such a good job protecting all these beautiful places, and it's added value across the board and made these properties really valuable. And we did a lot to protect groundwater, and it was the right thing to do. We learned a lot. We live on top of our aquifer, but that meant upzoning and less densities, and those smaller lots weren't available. When you start with land costs of $1 million just for the land, for even a relatively small lot, there's no way you're going to make that affordable. This referendum we're going to talk about provides some hope that we can bridge the affordability gap, and we'll get into that. But we haven't had that type of tool before. But it's such a big gap right now.
Yeah.
It's so complicated. So yeah, I appreciate you asking that
Yeah,
question.
yeah, no, I think it's an important place to start is, the education of it all. How are you going to comment if you don't know the history? Legislator Fleming, your thoughts?
Well, Matt, thank you so much for organizing this, and thank you to everyone who's here. It's so critically important, and of course, thank you to Fred for being the architect of this incredible bill. I represent East Hampton, Southampton, Shelter Island, a little bit of Brookhaven in the Suffolk County Legislature. So I can just speak from a regional perspective. It is not just East Hampton or Southampton's issue by any means, and the pandemic really had an explosive impact on property values across Suffolk County. The median price of a home in Suffolk County is now $575,000, and that went up 9.5% in the past year. So it is a crisis that's sort of taken over the entire region. But one thing that's so exciting about this very elegant solution that's in the CPF fund is just a furtherance of the elegant solution that the CPF fund itself presents. And I so admire the architects of that. Going back to Judith Hope and yourself, Brad, and others, to try to solve a challenge by the challenge itself. So in property transfers, you have the funds that can go into a transfer tax. And so as you're building development, you're also getting the revenue that kind of offsets some of the impact of the development. For many years, that was open space and farmland preservation. And then Fred took the initiative to move it into clean water technologies and protecting our groundwater and our surface waters. And now you're taking the next step, which is housing. And I can say, as someone who has represented Southampton, but now now sits in the Suffolk County Legislature, it is another place where East Hampton and Southampton and our fantastic representatives lead the charge. And so as you're thinking about this referendum, please bear in mind that the impacts are going to be very important for Matt and other 25-year-olds who need a home. And by the way, about 2 hours ago, I got a text message from a real estate agent, total stranger, asking if I'd consider all cash for my home.
Oh my God, you
True
can't make this
story.
up. You can't.
And
make
I
this
live in Noyak. I live in a very modest neighborhood, which is becoming very fancy. So, and not my house though, it's not for sale. We worked too hard to earn it. but they do want to buy it and knock it down and build a very large home because it's a small house. But at any rate, it is really important to recognize that the impact that you'll have region-wide is very real as well. These solutions, even Brookhaven, which is just west of South Hampton, has not come to their, has not developed the political will to pass a CPF, to take that step where you're dedicating funding to these crisis moments that will keep your community a real community. Because it's not just about wealth, although it is. It's not just about the economy, although it is. It's not just about climate change, because transportation is doing damage to our atmosphere as folks come from further and further west to work here. But it's also the character of our community. A community is rich and real and feels like a place you want to be when there is diversity in the folks who live in the community. You want to have the folks. You don't want to have just a second home community. It will become sterile and lose so much of the real feeling that makes a home community, a home. So I'm so glad we've had the opportunity to look at this. I, at the county level, do what I can to support in a small way the efforts of the town. I know Katie Casey is here, who works very hard in East Hampton town and does a great job. We're happy to step in and give tiny, tiny amounts of support relative to the overall cost of projects. But it is really the work at the town level that is tackling this issue. And so the referendum is going to make a huge difference for that. And so I certainly encourage you to support it. But I'm pleased to be part of the educational process.
Yeah. Thank you. Senator Palumbo?
Before Senator Palumbo speaks, I just want to say one thing. I appreciate all the kind words tonight, with regard to putting this legislation together. But it takes partners. And, this has been an idea for a while. It's been legislation for a while. But Senator Palumbo got it across the finish line in the state Senate.
Thank you.
And together we were able to convince a new governor to sign this bill. So I just wanted, before he spoke, I just wanted to say thank you to Tony Palumbo. He's been a great partner. He got this through the state Senate, and I'm very appreciative after all these years. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Palumbo.
Thank you, and thank you, Fred. I was going to say you couldn't have done it without me, but I'm just kidding. Look, and I served in the Senate for about 7 years, in the Assembly before I ran for Senate. When Senator Laval retired, Senator Laval was in this seat for 44 years. I was about 3 when he was elected, but of course supported it over there. And Matt, don't feel badly, because I grew up in Patchogue and went to college, went to law school. I was working in the Suffolk County DA's office. I was handling homicides. My wife's a lawyer. I met her in law school, and I lived with my mom and dad.
Oh, wow.
So don't feel terribly. We all need to get there. And quite frankly, I spent a lot of my time on the South Fork. I now live in the town of New Suffolk. And 20 years ago, I had done construction when I was younger. I was looking on the South Fork. The prices were at the time prohibitive, even exponentially higher today. The North Fork was not yet discovered. So I got a vacant lot in the beautiful community of New Suffolk on Grathwall Road, across from the water, $140,000. You couldn't buy a shed for $140,000 in New Suffolk today. And so this is, as some of our other panelists have mentioned, this is something that's regional, that it is, unfortunately, it's a beautiful place to live. We've done so much. We're a victim of our own success, as we've all been saying. But the concern is, of course, my kids, I have a freshman in college and an 11th grader. So the likelihood of them living on the east end of Long Island, because the North Fork has turned into what the South Fork used to be. Beautiful place to live. We get it. And the second home crew, they're coming out and buying with cash. You know, millions of dollars and millions of dollars. And now we've had, I think it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, it was the first sale of a North Fork single-family residence over 14 million or so. So it's discovered. And that's why this is so critical and so important. And in all seriousness, Assemblyman Thiele has championed this for many, many years. Of course, Senator Laval carried it. It went through a few vetoes at one point, right? And in the Senate, this did come up on the active list and then was pulled. And I had many members concerned, saying, you're going to tax these poor residents of the great state of New York, particularly Long Island. You're so overtaxed, you're going to tax these folks during a pandemic? And once I described it and they understood the nuance of where we live, they realized how important and how critical that is. It's a start. There's more to be done for sure, but just to create this fund, the CPF was the pilot program. And with the amount of money and good that's done for our communities, this is certainly something that we all support, and we do appreciate you all being here and supporting it. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If I could get the slides up so I can go through some stuff here. Now, of course, as you can see, and Mr. Thiele alluded to this, the population of East Hampton has gone from 16,132 in 1990 to 28,385 in 2020. It was the single largest increase from 2010 to 2020, up roughly 6,900 or so. And that was the biggest increase ever according to any recorded data. Again, Jeremy, if I'm saying anything wrong, please feel free. Jeremy's the town planner, does a great job. So I wanted to just read out what it is we're talking about today. The Peconic Bay Region Community Housing Fund would finance the creation of affordable housing units in East Hampton Town through a 0.5% real estate transfer tax paid exclusively by buyers of real estate within the town. Existing property owners would pay nothing. First-time home buyers, they'll pay nothing. And it's exempt up to $400,000, I believe, and it's only on purchases above $1 million. So I'm going to bring up a little sheet here. So as you can see, this may look a little confusing. I'm going to do my best to explain it. On the left-hand column, we have the purchase price. In the middle column, we have what we currently have, the Community Preservation Fund tax. And then on the right column, we have the Community Preservation Fund plus, if passed, the Community Housing Fund tax. And as you can tell, up until $1 million, you actually pay less in taxes. I'm not a statistician. I won't be able to explain why that is. But after $1 million, it only goes up a little bit. So you go from $17,000 at a $1.1 million home to $17,500, only an extra $500. And if you could pay a second home in the Hamptons, you could pay upwards to the $10 million of only an extra $55,000. And trust me, if you could pay $10 million for a home but can't afford $55,000, well, then something's not right. Now, of course, I wanted to get into some stats first before we get into some questions here. And these are some more of the staggering statistics. There were 600 new housing units, 60-40 as far as seasonal year-round, so it actually leans towards the seasonal homes. Like I said, there's 21,000, or I haven't said this yet, there's 21,655 total housing units in the town of East Hampton. Oh, by the way, this is all East Hampton stats, not Southampton. 617 units are affordable, considered affordable, less than 3% of the total units. 25% of all town households have severe housing problems, and I'll show you what that means on the next slide. More than 33% of mortgage holders pay more than 35% of their income. More than 70% of renters pay more than 35% of their income. And then finally, the median age of East Hampton is now 46.8. That's up 5 from Suffolk County. And then, like I mentioned earlier, single-parent households have dropped 25%. The young workforce population has slightly dropped, and the young school-age population has also dropped. Now we'll go on. I just want to show, since we're already here, housing problems. In case you're wondering what that entails, this is based on CHAS data. Household is said to have a housing problem if they have one or more of these 4 problems based on federal standards. Housing unit lacks complete kitchen facilities. Housing unit lacks complete plumbing facilities. Household is overcrowded, and a household cost is burdened. Now, I really wanted to ask, because a lot of you mentioned this, and some of my questions are just going to come from my head. And those who have interviewed, you've probably noticed that with me. One question I was thinking about when you guys, because you guys all said it, we talk about preserving land and how we did it so well that it attracted this large group of people to come to our area in the summer. At what point does it actually hurt to preserve land when we need to build housing? Yeah, please, Fred, please.
Well, you said you pulled these questions out of your head. I may be pulling the answers out of a different part of my anatomy, but the answer to that question is every town, and Southampton and East Hampton have been leaders of this, every town has a comprehensive plan. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as you say, the town planner is here today, Jeremy Samuelson. The comprehensive plan is the plan for the town for the future, and it is a balanced plan. You identify the areas where commercial and business activity should be. You identify the areas where farmland should be, where residential development should be, what should be preserved for open space. So each of the towns have that plan. And I hear this from time to time, about, well, open space is the reason why there's not affordable housing here. The areas that are being preserved are areas like wetlands and farmland. These were not the areas that people wanted to develop. The carrying capacity of the land is only so much. Whether we're talking about water quality or we're talking about traffic, we see it all the time. So the plan in Southampton and East Hampton identify, what's the right population for the area that the land and the community can support and all of that. So, each of these towns have identified where open space should be, where development should be. And that's good, because if somebody wants to invest in the community, they know where they can go. The idea, the towns, for all that they've spent on open space, by definition, it's only 2% of the entire real estate activity that's happening here every year. So it's really not open space that has had the impact on affordable housing. It's the fact that you've got the 1/10 of the 1% who think this is a really great area to live in and are really creating that demand and creating those prices. And by the way, as far as open space goes, it was written long ago, before the CPF was in place, that open space is the best buy. The open space demands less in services, it requires less in taxes. And that is why tax rates in East Hampton and Southampton on the East End are lower than they are in Western Suffolk and Nassau. If development paid for itself in taxes, Levittown and Hop Hog would have the lowest tax rates. They don't. So we have an issue certainly with housing. Let's not scapegoat open space or land preservation. We still need to have clean, the idea is, well, we can have more density, and I suspect if we just had more density and didn't have programs like this, it would be more second homes.
Yep.
And we'd also be impacting our water quality, our traffic, et cetera. So, the idea here is, as part of a comprehensive plan, you identify the tools that you need, given the circumstances that we are presented with here, about how do you allow local families and local workers to compete here and be able to stay. And we've decided that really it's going to take money. You know, the towns used to do a great job in open space, but conservation couldn't keep pace with development. We needed the CPF. East Hampton and Southampton are doing affordable housing projects, but they don't have the resources to keep pace with the demand.
Yep.
That is what this is all about. And, nobody likes taxes. Tony mentioned it. You know, he had to educate people about this, the word tax. But, think about this particular tax. First of all, I like to call it the welcome stranger tax. It's the buyer pays it, and there's a reason for that. The people that grew up and have lived here and have paid property taxes for 10, 20, 30, 50 years, they made the investment in this community. And it's a hell of a place that everybody wants to come to. The new people that have gotten the benefit of that investment pay up because we already have.
Yeah.
And, it is that demand for second homes that is making it difficult for families to get a first home. There's a rough justice to those that are spending millions of dollars on second homes and making it more difficult for local families to be part of the solution so that they have volunteer firefighters, they've got nurses at the hospital, they've got teachers at the school. So, nobody likes the word tax, but from a policy perspective, there is a justice to this as we try to solve the affordable housing solution in town.
Yeah. I think Peter's
I'd
been.
like to say,
please.
I agree completely with Fred's characterization of open space. And, I've heard this myself, because the CPF has been so successful and has, saved open space, that this has driven the cost of land up. And frankly, I think you have to understand that while it may have some modest effect, we're not talking about local people buying homes here. We're talking about second homes. The last 600 homes that were built in East Hampton, 60% of them were second homes. And you think about how many of those homes are really basically piggy banks. They're just plopping their money into an investment. They're not contributing to the community in terms of providing any services or interactions beyond maybe Airbnb use, for instance, which has also really exacerbated the housing issue. This tax is paid by the purchaser. It's a cost of admission. It's a contribution to our community. And frankly, it's a much lower contribution than most of these folks would pay for any of their clubs. What is it, $1 million to join Bridge? I don't know.
I don't know.
So I think while land is finite, we are seeking to preserve the character and history of our town. That's critical. And the fabric of our town. We are blessed that we have indigenous people who lived on this land before the first settlers. Our town was founded in 1648. We have descendants of those first European families, and we have everybody who came after. And it's really an amazing amalgamation of people in history, and I think we lose that if we have a bunch of empty houses that are here for summer use only, and there isn't really any connection to the community beyond, this is where I parked my money, this is where I want a vacation, or this is where I want to monetize. We're a community, not a commodity.
Exactly. Yeah, Jay, it looks like you wanted to say something.
So on that question, I think, again, it's an important question, Matt, in terms of whether our open space efforts are competing with affordable housing. And first of all, there's millions and millions of people in New York City and the metropolitan area. There's only so much land out here. So even if we had preserved nothing, if we didn't have the CPF, we'd be still having the same problem because of a supply and demand. We're a beautiful place. We're surrounded by water. I'm very involved, obviously, as supervisor with the CPF program. One of my colleagues, Councilman Schiavone, is here as well. And I could tell you, even though CPF took in over $100 million last year, there's nothing we bought that could or would have been affordable.
Yep.
We tend to buy waterfront lots to create access for people to waterfront. some of these big, 5-acre wooded lots that are adjoining other open space, they weren't going to be affordable. So, there's not a single thing I could think of that we've purchased with CPF funds that should have been developed as affordable housing. We wouldn't have touched it if we thought, oh, there's a small lot, infill development. We're going to allow that to get developed with the hope that it's affordable, but it's probably not going to be affordable anyway because somebody's going to buy it as a second home, tear it down and build a McMansion there. So we haven't had this resource to create affordable housing to counter that supply and demand problem. So now, we have this glimmer of hope that, this referendum will pass, we'll have some money, we can bridge that affordability gap. And look, we've been doing our best in Southampton. And, and also East Hampton, when I was here too, I was sued plenty of times every time we proposed affordable housing because people didn't want it. And, it's challenging to get it off the ground and acquire the land. But we've had some really successful proposals go through in Southampton. We have a number on the table now, but it does feel like you're sort of swimming against Niagara Falls, right? That things are becoming more unaffordable faster than you could possibly make them affordable. That real estate, when things go up so fast, and they have through the last, the years that I've been in office, the property values through the pandemic and even prior to the pandemic, even the tough years of like the Great Recession, 2007, 2008, maybe it was flat. Other than that, it's been like 10%, 15% every year. It's very hard to catch up.
Yeah.
And we haven't had the tool. The CPF has been an extraordinary tool for land preservation. We've been able to maintain our agricultural heritage, our farmland, because of CPF. We've been able to protect our groundwater. We've been able to provide access to beaches and waterways that we would have lost without it. So we've had this engine for preservation. We haven't had an engine for creating affordable housing. We may have one soon, but we haven't had that. And so we don't have the tools at local government to really do all that we could. And even this, if it passes, we're still going to have a tough time. It'll be better, but it's still going to be a big challenge.
And not to skip over Legislator Fleming and Anthony Palumbo, but if you don't mind, I'll just move on to the next topic, unless you guys have something. Yeah, please.
I'll just say, in terms of open space, one thing we can't lose track of is wildlife habitat, and that one of the things that really drives the economy here is that folks know that they have access to recreation and wildlife recreation, and we need contiguous wildlife habitat in order to really represent that and here for the entire region. So we're seeing wildlife rehabilitated and coming back. I don't know how many of you have seen bald eagles lately, but it's an extraordinary thing that's happening.
We
and
have
that
bald
is
eagles on our tower right next to Town Hall on a very regular basis. So if anybody hasn't seen them, come by Town Hall, look above the 300 Panago. They're often roosting in the top of that tower.
I just saw one 30 feet away from me on the walk on the beach in Noyak. I've never ever seen the white tail feathers go as it took off after an osprey and a little bit of a fight they had over a fish. But at any rate, the point being, open space is critically important for that. And both East Hampton and Southampton have drafted plans to put into place if this referendum passes. And, I know Tommy John Scavone and also Councilwoman Kathy Burke-Gonzalez are here, and they've worked really hard on these plans. But they have designed ways to make use of this funding that does not disrupt the general planning of the overall towns, and you're going to be able to see, very sensitive approaches to building out affordable housing without interrupting, these critically important parts of our community, like contiguous open space and recreation in the natural world.
Awesome. Senator Palumbo?
Matt, just real quick.
Yeah,
Thank
of
you.
course.
And regarding the mechanics of the bill,
Yeah.
and when you're garnering support, just talking about it, those thresholds go up because the implementation of the Community Housing Fund raises the exemption thresholds for the CPF. So the way it works now, For example, I believe it's different on each fork, but in East Hampton, it's $250,000. Even if you're buying the $20 million home, the first $250,000 is exempt. And then the CPF kicks in at 2%. This raises the threshold to $400,000. That's why the numbers go down. It's a new tax, yes, but it's actually a tax cut, which is important to know for the regular folks who are buying homes under $1 million.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, Jason, please.
I hear almost at every meeting, whether it's going to be a larger town board meeting or something smaller like the ARB, we have a term that's character of the area. And we always talk about this in terms of the pastoral nature of it, the sea life. At what point are we going to wonder whether preserving that idea of an area is going to preserve people? Are we going to finally say, you know what, I don't like an apartment building, this is true, I understand that, but do we say an apartment building it's better to see an apartment building than an empty school? You know, if we want to look at what a good place to be or to build would look like, drive past the airport and say that would make a hell of a place for a main street. Look at each side of it. And every time that they land a jet there, think about somebody useful could be living there. Somebody could be working there. You can make a home. Out of all of us here, when we walk down Main Street, how many of us feel at home who work for a living? I don't. I don't shop at Prada. You probably can tell that. But
What about Cartier?
only when I want to treat myself. But it's a tough call, which is that I think we're at a crisis point of character as much as we are that of housing and of scarcity. We're going to have to eventually make a tough choice, which is how do we move forward? And the problem is that if we use the character of an area argument again and again, that's going to be a fallacy of misplaced concreteness. It's going to be retrospective determinism. We're going to be looking backwards to go forwards. We're not going to be saying to ourselves, in 50 years, we're going to be saying to ourselves, what the heck were we thinking when this place is just empty and maybe ran by Amazon drones at that point? So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you all so much for being here.
Yeah, I think that really is the focus of our effort here,
Yeah.
is to, preserving community character as well as community characters. I think we have to we have to make sure that, our community, the history, the communal knowledge continues. That's what I was alluding to with the fact that we have people who are
Absolutely.
still living in town. There's that continuity on the land in this place that is unparalleled. I mean, you can look at communities all over. Very few communities have that still. And, that's what we need to preserve. In addition to having been very successful at preserving our natural, environment here and the scenic beauty of the place, we now have to turn our focus to preserving the community of people and making sure that it's sustainable. And that's really our primary focus here. And so we're not going to, as I said earlier, I don't think we're going to be able to build our way out of this issue. It's going to take a very multifaceted approach. My fellow council members and I are working very hard to look at all aspects of that. That may mean, additional relaxation of some of our zoning laws in order to allow affordable, detached and attached apartments on already existing homes. We know that there are a number of people in town who have homes. Their children are living at home. They would like to convert that garage into an apartment where either they or their children could live. And so we're looking at that as one way. That maintains the continuity and character of neighborhoods as well.
Yeah.
So I think that really is what we're trying to do here. And the two are not exclusive of each other.
It's just tough because sometimes it seems that every time we try to put forward something for affordable housing, character is always going to be a double-edged sword. We're always going to have a good aspect of it and a beautiful aspect of it that we're always going to be proud of. And then there's always going to be a rub to it. And sometimes that rub is seeing people that you love them, you see them every single day, say the worst things about affordable housing, say absolutely the worst things about the people who are going to be their neighbors. I don't want those people there. And you're there, you're like, who are you talking about? You know? And so it's going to be a question where it's like, I think as a community, we're going to have to find our salt effectively. We're going to have to find where we want to be, and not just looking at and hearkening back to the days when, like, we just had potato fields and Suffolk was the most productive county in New York State. It's going to be a different, I think we have to be willing to adapt. I'm happy that we both have town boards and politicians that do this, but it's almost like on a community character level. It has to, I mean, I see people try to sue over this constantly, and it's insane to me.
Jason, I think,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to set up an order
Sorry.
here. I think it was Fred, Jay, Palumbo, and then Fleming.
So-
It seems a lot of reaction to your comment. Thank you.
So a couple of points. First of all, I think that, when it comes to community character, how do you define it, right? And, that's kind of the, right at the core of this. And, Community Preservation Fund, great program. It helped to preserve the things about this in the natural environment that were special. But if we preserve land and we preserve the water and people can't afford to be here, we haven't done our job. And, to me, the people that live here that's the soul of the community. The real estate prices here have gotten so many people want to play in the real estate market. We are in danger of becoming a commodity instead of a community. And that is what we really need to address with this program. And as Peter had said, we're not going to build our way out of this. We also have to have programs that are creative, that gets the existing housing stock within the reach of people who can't afford that down payment, can't make the monthly payments. Maybe the options are, isn't home ownership right away. Maybe it's an accessory apartment, as was mentioned before. So, that is what this is all about. I always describe the Community Housing Fund as the sister of the Community Preservation Fund. Preserving land and water is great. That is one of the things that makes this thing special. It is also the backbone of our economy. Our environment is our economy. But people have to be able to live here, and that is why this proposal is so very, very important that we have it, because this is the tool in the toolbox that will allow the town board to have, as Jay says, that engine that's necessary to preserve or to preserve people so that they can afford to stay here. And the last thing I'm just going to say on this part of it, because you mentioned, that affordable housing projects sometimes are difficult, to get public support. And that's why forums like this are so very important. When the Community Preservation Fund passed in 1998, it got almost 70% of the vote. And when we added water quality in 2016, it almost got 80% of the vote. I am completely aware of the fact that more people would rather live next to a nature preserve than they would next to affordable housing. This is not an easy vote. I mean, anybody who's an elected official knows the slings and arrows that you have to endure to try to promote affordable housing projects. And I think, what I will say is I think that public opinion has shifted because they see the same crisis that we're talking about tonight. But we need people to come out and vote for this proposition, and they need to understand that the towns have put together plans. These decisions are not being made on the state level. They're being made at the local level, trying to find that balance where we keep local families, we keep our local workers without undermining the other parts of that balanced, comprehensive plan that we also need to sustain.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Fred, you like my word engine. I like your word soul, because I think that really gets to the heart of things, that the soul of the community. Like, what kind of community are we? When, the music teacher, like Peter's wife, Marilyn, can't live in the community, can't come to the school play at night, or whatever, because it's just too far and can't see the kids. Because, you know, when the nurse can't respond to an emergency after hours at the hospital, whatever it is, because they don't live anywhere near it. When now we have, you know, a lot of the ambulances are really struggling to find volunteers. Like I don't want to live in a community that's just really wealthy people. You know, a lot of my friends are musicians and artists, and, you know, it is challenging. Like, we don't have rentals, we don't have small plays, we have all these larger lots. You know, you want to create apartments over stores in downtown, but everybody feels like the downtowns are these historic centers. And you do get a lot of community resistance. You mentioned those people. I just wanted to share a story. When I was here in East Hampton and we proposed Green Hollow, the subdivision. And it was really controversial. And somebody came to town hall and said, "We don't want those people." And I said, "I am those people. I am those people." Because I was struggling to live in the community too, and I didn't have great means. And they ended up putting a sign on the housing office, "I am those people." And it was like Supervisor Schneiderman. It was, you know, they had a little poster on it. And that was actually at a time when it was all throughout the region. My friend Josh Horton, who was supervisor of Southold, he was struggling to actually live in the community. The mayor, was a woman mayor, I forget her name, up in Sag Harbor, she was priced out. Like, the people who were actually running the communities couldn't afford to live in the communities. It was, you know, really challenging time, and I'm better off today than I was back then. But when you can't have the very people you need for your community to function living within your community, can you call it a community? It's a great question.
Senator Palumbo, and then County Legislator Fleming.
Sure. The beauty of this legislation is it is by referendum. And that's really what I thought was brilliant about it, is that you have 4 of the 5 eastern towns have it on the ballot. Riverhead does not. Unfortunately, they had some financial issues. They borrowed against their CPF funding. But Shelter Island, Southold, East Hampton, Southampton. So it's something that we passed it, it's adopted by the local boards, and then goes to referendum. So that's good government in my opinion, because it has the input of the people. And I think that's the logic, that it's a fluid thing. There is no specific way to implement it. It will be done by each individual town with their promulgating their own, really generally their own rules. This is just a revenue stream. And I guarantee you, if either of the supervisors or any of them on the East End propose Left Rack City, I guarantee that's not going to fly. So, you know, there's got to be that balance. And just one more quick comment. Right in Mattituck, right in by it's an Old Sound Avenue there, right by Love Lane, where the turn is. You go over by the Presbyterian Church. There's a little community of beautiful little homes that were affordable homes, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 3-bedroom, 1-bath, smaller, probably 1,500 square feet or less. They were selling them for $125,000, $140,000, $150,000, and it's a cul-de-sac, and they're beautiful. Cedar shake, really, really nice, affordable homes. So you're not going to typically, I can't imagine that anyone would put this eyesore of ugliness up that has high traffic impacts and is terrible. So I think that's really the point. And I believe that the comments, of course, are all consistent, that the way it operates is those are all done individually by each town on the local level with local community input, and that's what's
why it's
critical.
going to be a great thing for this community. But we would be at a disservice just to talk about the benefits of the bill, and I think it's going to pass. I personally, as a person, I'm hopeful towards it. But again, I think that we have to address the challenges that we're going to face with just the ugliness some days. The fact that people find it okay to sue and sue and sue again over just saying, you know what, you deserve to live next to me. You work for a living, you support this community.
Bridget, and then we're going to move on to the ballot.
Thanks. I do want to just note that I think it is, you need to think long and hard about trying to move away from the character of the community standard, particularly at the zoning board, because it can move in the other direction as well. What we've seen a lot of are variances being granted for larger and larger homes. And what you're doing is the character of the community standard is slipping away, and you have zoning by variance, which creates massive homes. That's what's happening in my neighborhood in Noyak, where we used to have all very modest sized homes, and now they're getting larger and larger and taking up an entire building envelope or right up to the edge of the property line. And then the next one that comes in, they say, well, you granted a variance to this one, and so the character of the community starts to slip. So I would be careful of that. But I would say also that as Tony was mentioning, the good government part of this, you know, Southampton and East Hampton in particular really do set a tone across the region of community involvement and thoughtful planning. And Jeremy, congratulations. But a lot of, I mean, we've seen some really great planners come through Southampton and East Hampton, and both of the programs, when they fit into the master plan for the town, like Southampton has a sustainability element, so everything that's contemplated at the policy level has to, you know, comply with the sustainability goals of the town. That is, it's kind of a structural backstop on the challenges that you face about, you know, folks being concerned about, you know, moving too far on affordable housing. So what we've had is, I agree with you that it's those persons, you know, resistance is extremely unfortunate, and I don't think it's very American, and we have to be mindful of that. But I do think having, like, I was sat on the Southampton Town Board when we passed the first rental affordable housing project east of the Shinnecock Canal. It was the first time you had 26 units rentable. It was on North Sea Road. It's called Sandy Hollow. It was one of the very first. And we sat through years of attacks from the community. We were sued, but we did build this, you know, we did approve this project that is consistent with the vernacular, you know, the architecture of the community. The traffic issues were faced head on and addressed. And there's no bugaboo. There's nothing scary about it. It's completely, you know, fitting within the character of the community, and it's 26 families or young people or older people who have a place to live who wouldn't otherwise because they can't afford a down payment. And then that same,
That came out great.
yeah, it's beautiful. It's up, yeah, right before you got to, before that odd, tall snowman guy. But at any rate, and then it's repeated. It's Beyond Commons was one that similar thing where all those, it's hard for us at the town level or to sit through all those meetings, but it's important in terms of community input. That's how we do it. You know, we have the tough conversations and we take on, you know, perspectives that aren't exactly like our own. But in that way, democracy allows us to shape solutions that really do work. And I think we do have to face head on the idea that, you know, the other, you know, folks who don't want people who feel like the other in their communities. But we're talking the developments that were built in Southampton and in East Hampton too, the new one that's just going up on 3 Mile Harbor. I mean, these are beautiful, beautiful projects, and the folks who live there are people who we love and want in our communities, you know. So I think that is a bugaboo kind of from the past a little bit, because it's such a desperate circumstance now that when I mentioned at the groundbreaking at 3 Mile Harbor that I admire all the town board members who sit through all the difficult meetings, you know, Councilwoman Overby said it wasn't really difficult. Everybody wanted this project. And you see that more and more. It happened with Scoyoc. Everybody wanted that project. Mm-hmm. So I think I understand your concern, but I would be careful about the community character standard. I think it serves a very important purpose, and we may end up having like nothing but McMansions if we don't look out for community character. I think it's an opportunity with public input to do what works for everyone in the community.
I understand.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank
Thank
you
you,
for all your
Jason.
work.
Let me just get through the ballot, and then we'll have you two ask questions up front. I'd feel really remiss if I wasn't able to go over the ballot. I put them on every other seat. There's definitely less than 50 people here, so please take one home with you. Also, Peter Van Scoyoc brought some lovely materials from the East Hampton town. Michael Daly brought some lovely paper material you can bring home with you from Southampton town. And then Peter also was able to give some COVID tests. So you get to go home with some COVID tests as well. I think that's a great thing. You never know. You never know. So maybe he's just trying to get rid of them. I don't know. Let's go over the ballot. I just want to read it and get in Peter's head, and maybe Jeremy as well, because I think he was part of this as well. To fund affordable housing opportunities in East Hampton town, shall local laws amending Chapter 160 of the Town Code entitled Community Housing Opportunity Fund and adding new Chapter 162 entitled Supplemental Real Estate Transfer Tax for Community Housing, establishing a 0.5% tax paid by the purchaser of real property in the town, with the revenues deposited in the East Hampton Community Housing Opportunity Fund be approved. And then you simply have two options. Yes or no, right? There's no other options, right? Two options. Very simple. Unlike the election 2 years ago, those made no sense. So, Peter, I know we talked about it off air once, but you really wanted to make sure that this was clear. Can you talk to me about
so
that?
let me just ask those in the audience, you've seen it, you've heard it, do you understand it? Can I show of hands?
Oh, come on, Jeremy.
Jeremy Samuelson, our planning director, is here, and he was on the committee that I formed to put together the ballot and also the community housing fund amendments. And I'll just say that, it was a bit of a learning curve for me because I'd never worked on preparing a ballot referendum before. And so I called Anita Katz at Suffolk County Board of Elections, who sadly is passed on now, but just before she did, I spoke with her about the wording, and my own personal experience was that every other ballot measure I'd ever seen, I had to read up about it as to what it really meant because the language on the ballot itself was so confusing. The average person really didn't know what they were voting for, so many times I think people didn't vote, or they thought they were voting one way and it turned out they voted another. So I called her and I asked what was the requisite number of double negatives that had to appear in the ballot measure.
It's so true.
To which she laughed. And so, we worked very hard with the committee. We spent a lot of time on this, just trying to make it simple and understandable because people need to know what they're voting for. Obviously, this is what appears on the ballot. There is also supporting materials that are available at the voting areas, locations to help inform people as well. So there's a little summary that goes along with this. And obviously, there's the plan itself. So there's a lot of information out there, but really I think this is pretty self-explanatory.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Also, I wanted to let everyone know that you have 1 week to register to vote. October 14th is the last day you could register to vote. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Fred, did you want to add?
Yeah, just about the ballot. When you go to vote this year, we vote by optical scan. We have these big ballots. You could hang glide with them sometimes. They're big. So the candidates are on the front of the ballot. And I know there's at least 3 of us up here who think the front of the ballot is really, really important. But I'm here to talk about the other side of the ballot, and that is the propositions.
Well, this is awkward.
Are on the back of the ballot. You've got to flip the ballot over to vote on the propositions. And
Don't flip these over.
Sometimes people forget about that. So please, don't forget about the front of the ballot, but flip the ballot over because that's where the propositions are. And not only this ballot proposition is proposal 3. There are 3 proposals. This is number 3 because it's the local proposition. But I know we're here tonight to talk about affordable housing, but there's also a $4.2 billion bond act, state bond act, that's going to help us deal with issues such as climate change and water quality and open space and other issues, where we can leverage our local dollars for state dollars. So don't forget about ballot proposal number 1, and I think ballot proposal number 2, for those of you, because if I didn't mention it, you'd want to know what the heck it was. It's a county proposition that relates to the term limit law for the county, where there was confusion as to, I guess, in that case, it wasn't the proposition that wasn't written in English. Apparently, it was the law itself that wasn't written in English, because there are term limits in Suffolk County, as 2 of our panelists, well, actually, that was before my time, are aware. And the question really was 12-year term limit. Is that a lifetime amount, 12 years, or is it if you had 12 consecutive years, could you, if there was 2 years, 2-year hiatus, could you come back and have another 12 years? And this was designed to clarify. I think the way they wrote it is that the law, it would be just 12 years. It's kind of a lifetime thing, right? So, okay. So that's all I wanted to say about the ballot. Please flip the ballot over. I've said it 3 times. I probably will say it at least one more before the end, because and we did this with water quality. It was the first time we had the optical scan, and I think it was back in 2016. And there's usually a drop off on the ballot propositions, but that was a year people out here felt so strongly about water quality. More people voted for the propositions than they did for the candidate.
Wow.
So I didn't take it personally, but it shows you how important the water quality is. So.
Well, wow, I have a lot of content here for 6 forums. I thought I was struggling last night, thinking I was going to run out of things to say. I'd love to go to questions from the audience. I'm going to start with you, ma'am, then you, ma'am, and then Michael, and then Jane. Yep, you can come up here, identify yourself, please, and ask the panel your questions.
I just drip character. I've worked with you all for a very long time on a lot of things. And for your information, Lavelle made me a woman of distinction in 2000, dragged me to Albany when I was running the Cancer Task Force. And I got Jay to bark on the radio station because we were running the Pure campaign. And I was building Habitat for Humanity houses on the Shinnecock Reservation. I know about death threats. This happens, and I hope your eyes are open to the fact that these things happen still on Eastern Long Island. So we have a wonderful community here with a lot of character, but we also have people in this country who don't feel comfortable with a place like we are. So, as most of you know, I'm a 12th generation Bonnaker, and I come from the Hamilton family, which means that we go way back. And I am determined that this proposition will pass. And one of the things I'm strongly suggesting you do, because I know you've been working months and months on these details, is that you put forward a simple page on each kind of affordable housing we want to encourage over stores, in buildings that have been turned over to the county for taxes that are available, in affordable developments, of course. I was part of the Manor House development, as you know, with Barbara Jordan and many other people who have since passed away. But also people like my husband and I, who are middle class and would like to consider having an apartment. How do we go about easily making an apartment in our home on 1.25 acres on Roberts Lane? What are the steps to making that happen so that when I get into the booth and make my decision about voting for this or not voting for this, I know what my plans are going to be as soon as it passes. And I'm going to make it pass because I want new employees to live over my business. Or I have just built a big house and I need a staff of 5. And if they're going to be driven out of town because we've lost 3 lawn mowing companies in the last 4 years who couldn't find housing. I'm going to use a robot. I don't love robots, but that's what I'm going to use to cut my grass. So if big houses need staff who were living here in East Hampton and are being told that they're going to have to leave because the house that they rented for the last 10 years is for sale, why can't a big house put in an apartment and add to the housing, the affordable housing? If you've got local people here who need housing, how many people manage estates out here and know that there are apartments unknown in some of these bigger houses for staff? So I would like to walk into the booth knowing what I can do. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in order to accomplish the goals that I have to help my family stay in the town of East Hampton. But I need to know how to do that, because when I go to the website and try to figure this out, I need my husband and a cat to help me figure out step 1, 2, and 3 about what to do first to have an apartment in my home already. So what I'm saying to you is this is a tool to make this pass. Put information out there about how the normal people who live here now can help this problem quickly and easily. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter?
Yes, so Prudence, on your way out, there are flyers in the
Please take them.
entranceway, and each one of those flyers has a little bit different take on what's going to happen as a result of our community housing plan. There are QR codes on 2 of the flyers, which will take you to other links and give you the information that I think you're looking for. And of course, if anyone is interested, they can also contact our planning department, who's very well versed
I
in
knew
what's.
Jeremy when he was a little boy.
Yeah, so you can always corner Jeremy on the way out too.
Yeah. Well, my point is, give people the ammunition so they know what they're going to do
Yes.
after they vote for this.
We agree. Fully.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the next question is actually my sister, so I'm going to quickly skip her so I can get some stuff out quickly. I need to get information
All right, Matt,
out.
I think we need to hear from all of our constituents.
I just want to quickly go over the potential usages of funds so people can leave understanding, and then we can go to my sister.
Thanksgiving's going to be hard at your
I know. You can buy land or buildings, fund town-led projects for sale and or rent, fund public-private partnerships, rehabilitate, maintain existing buildings, provide down payment or other financial assistance to home buyers. Qualifying home buyers will be able to apply to up to 50% down payment assistance for homes up to roughly $1 million. Provide loans to construct ADUs, or as I like to call them, accessory dwelling units. And then create housing for employees of local businesses. And finally, provide housing counseling. I'm just trying to split in some info. I thought time would go slower. It hasn't. Jess, you can come up and ask your question now.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I am a new teacher at East Hampton High School, and I have 2 thoughts, so I'm trying not to muddle them in my head. The reason that I'm here isn't just because he told me to come. It's because, when he talked to me about this, I went and when he showed it to me, I looked at the question, I said, wow, that's a long question, but okay. And my biggest concern really was, when someone who's 30 and under, I'm working at the high school, I'm working with, kids that are really not kids anymore, they're 18, who are now going to be voting for the first time, and I'm under 30, and I'm looking at this and I'm go, okay, what are they going to think when they see this question? And I looked at it and I was like, okay, the first thing they're going to think is, okay, more tax, and I can't even pay my rent or my car payment right now. And the second thing that, I saw on here, I was like, okay, affordable housing, and then I immediately thought about what some people said, oh God, horrible, ugly buildings again. So I guess one of my biggest concerns was okay, when they sit down, is there going to be a summary that explains hi, we're not going to build these horrible, horrible buildings, and what does this actually mean for you? I'm, under 29, I don't have a housing payment yet. In fact, I don't live anywhere really right now. I float between my parents' house and my boyfriend's apartment because I can't afford to live out here. But I'm a teacher out here. So, I looked at that and I said, okay, like I hope there is something there that is clear, short, to the point where I can look at it and be like, okay, I'm not just gonna vote no right away because I see the word tax. I'm gonna see something that says, okay, you're not doing this unless you're buying a house for more than a certain amount of money or adding an addition for a certain amount. So that's great. The second thing I wanted to say, on the note of education, which has been brought up, in passing a little bit throughout conversation tonight, is a lot of times when we think about affordable housing, we don't think about the ties to community and education. As a new teacher, now friends with a wonderful group of new teachers at East Hampton High School, I can say that only one of them lives out here, other than me. All the others are commuting an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, even one of them, just to get to school every day. Whether that be them trying to figure out like, oh, let's carpool, let's take the train, let's drive in, and whatever. And then there's parent nights where we're here until 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and then they get home at 11 o'clock. Like, you don't think about that, and then you don't think about the effects that the lack of affordable housing has on our education system. And while a lot of people might not be pro-affordable housing, they are pro-education. And this is also an educational issue, because if we want to maintain teachers, and not just maintain teachers, but get good teachers, that means we need to have a place for them to go where they're not driving an hour and a half, 2 hours away. They need to be able to live close, be part of that school community, be able to run clubs, be able to coach sports, be able to stay after school, not get on a bus right away at 2:50 to get to that train to get home. It means that for us and our students, teachers are slowly leaving because the commute and the travel is just too much. And without that ability to be connected, teachers aren't connecting to the school they need to, the way they need to, sorry. And, we talk about education, we talk about things wanting to grow and innovate. Well, the teachers at our East Hampton High School are amazing, don't get me wrong, but you also need that new blood to bring in new ideas, to bring in new ways of teaching, to bring in new ways of using technology, to engage with students about, things that they connect with. All the teachers at East Hampton are wonderful, but without these options out here, without having places to live, that is slowly going to go away. And it's harder and harder, and I know this every year, to find people who are willing to make that sacrifice and stay more than 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, because they end up hating that commute. And so this isn't just an affordable housing issue. This is an extremely important educational issue. And if people care about their kids, they care about this community, and they want this community to grow, we need good teachers, and we need a place for them to be.
Thank you. Now, we don't have time for them.
Meg,
yeah.
just for a second. First of all, about more information, on the proposition, it's pretty limited what you can put in that proposition. But it gives me an opportunity to point out Michael Daly, who's here, who is with East End YIMBY, and really has been at the point of the spear as far as the campaign that is being put together of it's really an alliance, a consensus of community groups, and he has been at the forefront. You're going to see a lot of information here in the last month about this referendum, and what is nice about that is they can do advocacy. The towns legally are only able to provide educational information about the proposition. They're not allowed to use taxpayer dollars to advocate one way or the other. So I just wanted to say thank you to Michael for all the great work that he's been doing, and he'll be part of that advocacy campaign. And thanks so much, Michael. And the other thing I just wanted to, in response to your sister about education, we did a lot of research ahead of time as far as this ballot proposition. And one of the things that people reacted to the most positively was when we talked about it helping teachers and keeping teachers in communities. Because, it's important. It's an important part of the education experience. to have your teacher that can be there after school, is participating in extracurricular activities, and not only that, just getting teachers, because after the Great Recession, people would drive an hour and a half for a job out in East Hampton. They don't have to do that anymore, and they're not, and that's why it's so hard to get workers to come out here. But education is a critical part of that, and the teachers being in the community really goes to what the first questioner said about community character. Having teachers living in your community is part of that community character, part of the soul of the community that we were talking about earlier. So, I think you really hit upon a really important point. And, the encouraging part of that is when we did some research on this, we found that the public agrees. They really respond to that issue as far as how important it is. Because there's nothing that brings all of the people in the community together, regardless of where they came from, how long they've been here, than schools. Schools, my kids are older now, but when they were in the school, you get to meet everybody in the community, when your kids are in school. So it's a critical part. The schools are the center of most of the East End communities. That's why in places like Bridgehampton, when they tried to close the school about 25 years ago, and that was fought off, that's why that was so important. That school in Bridgehampton is literally at the heart of that community, and it's one of the things that unites people in that community. So thank you for raising that point.
Now, I don't personally have time to ask this question because we have citizens that would like to ask some questions, but I would like everyone in the room, while we're on the topic of education, and the panelists, to know about the Teachers Village apartment rentals in Newark, New Jersey. It was a massive success, and on the grand scale can be a vision for other entities to be able to build something like that, not only here in East Hampton and Southampton, but also across the entire country, because everybody knows teachers don't get paid enough. We all know that. And it's even harder in places like here, LA, San Francisco, Southampton. I know that's a really random group of places, but to find housing for teachers, but also have villages hopefully moving forward for police officers and emergency workers and government workers as well, because they all deserve to live in the community they work in. Michael, Jane, and then I would love to have my intern come up and ask a question before we have to wrap things up.
Thank you, and good evening, and thanks for your kind words, Assemblyman Thiele. I am a co-leader of East End YIMBY, which is a affordable housing advocacy group, and we see that the characters, as you said, Peter, earlier, that was really well said, because we say that as well. The characters in our community are part of our community character, right? And it's not just architecture, it's not just trees. We also say that human life is as important as wildlife. So while we can see 200 people come to a meeting to ban plastic straws to save, ducks, very often, until we started really engaging at town and village meetings, very often it was only the loud and the angry that came to affordable housing meetings, right? So we believe that we need to educate people and make them feel comfortable with understanding the aspects of affordable community housing and bring them to town and village meetings. And that's what we've been really focusing on. We're so grateful. And so my question really after those remarks was, Senator Palumbo, really appreciate the fact that you stood up and filled the shoes and helped with this bill to get passed. And very often affordable housing is looked upon as kind of a liberal partisan issue, right? But the fact of the matter is, Assemblyman Thiele, you're a registered independent, and Senator Palumbo, you are a registered Republican. So it proves that this is not a partisan issue. Could you speak a little bit to that about how, because a lot of the advocates are typically more of the liberal persuasion, but could you speak about how your followers and constituents really view this affordable housing?
Sure, certainly, and thank you. I appreciate you acknowledging that. I mean, that's, I think, an important issue because in the words of the great Senator Laval, to reference him again, he was a great mentor and friend. I was not in politics ever before 2013 when I decided to run for Assembly. I'd never carried a petition, so if you look at the financial disclosures, I made a lot more money as just a lawyer than I do doing this. So I vote my heart, I vote what's right for the district, and Ken would always say, first district first. This district now goes all the way to Stony Brook University, so I have all 5 eastern towns all the way to the Smithtown border, and that's your priority. All politics is local. As corny as that is, this is what's best for this community, and that's what I had to explain, and I think even pitching it, as we talked about earlier, to some of my colleagues from upstate who were just saying, I can't vote for a tax, this is insane. I said, well, you know, this is really only a tax. It's essentially a cut, as I said earlier, for really high-end types of homes. And I said, you know, homes over $1 million are really the ones that will be affected. And they're like, oh, goodness, we only have a few of those in my district because they're upstate. And I said, really? We don't have really, I didn't go say this part, we don't have too many that are actually under $1 million in my district. But, you know, that's something that I think is just critical. Is I almost feel as if it's almost, we need to find some euphemistic language. Affordable housing, people think of it as just this rundown, they think of NYCHA. You know, they think of the New York City housing where they don't have heat. They've got rats and cockroaches living in them. You know, and that's something that I've actually thought about, that, what do we say? It's more, you know, less expensive home. Reasonably priced housing. You know, that might sell much more easily because everyone has this ugly view of affordable housing. And as I mentioned earlier, people are shocked that that community in Mattatuck that I mentioned earlier is, quote, affordable homes, affordable housing. And I know, I think, is it Whalebone or one of them where there was a subsidy through the town out here? But that's really a very valid point, and it's really a pleasure to see that you've taken up that gauntlet because it's just, I think it's more education than anything. So people who may, you know, and again, I don't know if it's necessarily a partisan issue. It is typically, though, it is maybe more progressive thinking minded people who are always on the affordable housing train, but it's just education. Once people realize that this is so important because we don't have, I mean, how awful is that? I can't imagine, and Jessica, I guess it was Jess, was you were saying, that was like an infomercial for this bill. Because our communities, our schools and our children go there. I still have one in high school. You know, that's an incredible thing that, you know, we should really focus on our teachers. Just to recruit and retain teachers in East Hampton, I'm sure it's almost impossible. So, you know, and they're a part of, they spend more time with our children than we do. So during those formidable years. So I do appreciate it, and thank you.
Thank you. And Jane, you wanted to go?
First of all, Matt, thank you for
Of course.
doing this and your passion for it. And before I start, I just want to say I'm very excited to flip the ballot and vote yes for Proposition 3. And of course, the front of the ballot, too. And also, before I get into my question and comment, I just want to give maybe a little optimism. I don't want anyone to get, you know, too relaxed that it's going to pass. But I've been stationed, I think, for 5 weeks. It would have been 6 had we not gotten torrentialed last week, but outside of the Amagansett post office, working with some friends to register voters, but also really mainly to make sure we stop everyone we could and talk to them about this pending referendum. And, you know, I know there is ugliness out there, but I'm very happy to say that, I mean, we've probably spoken to a few hundred people, you know, over the last month or so. And with the exception of one really icky exchange, everyone is very excited or at least curious and open-minded about what this, you know, is for and what it can do. So I just wanted to say that. The main thing, though, is what we found is that many people didn't know it was coming, and I think obviously what YIMBY is doing is helping cure that. But all of us, like, we have to tell our friends, our families, our neighbors, and just really, you know, get them aware of it, because once people really heard what it was, they were like, yes, and it wasn't partisan, it was both parties. So that was just that little background. So so I live in Amagansett, and I was walking my dog on Bluff Road, as I do often, and all of a sudden a big sign appeared from a builder, not from here, in front of what is a small lot, 0.4 acres, with a modest ranch house on it that's been there. And then within 3 days of that, the jaws of death came in and gone in a matter of hours. And, it was a house that was a year-round rental, a modest house on a modest lot. And now it's, the plans are out. It's already listed, for sale. It's going to be a $5 million, 6-bedroom, everything jammed on. And next door to it, that happened a year ago. There was sort of a sister ranch next to it. And same thing, gone. Now it's on the market for $9 million. And it's, like 8 bedrooms and everything with it.
Wow.
So, I think the statistic is we have 21,655 housing units. I think that's what
Sounds
you said.
about right.
And I don't know the history of how that's changed. I'm sure it's grown. But I just want to raise this issue. I'm very concerned about the composition of our existing housing units, because just like these 2 houses, one after the other, after the other, after the other, of modest, smaller homes on smaller lots that could be affordable, that could be starter homes, maybe that could be turned into 2-family, homes, things like that. And I just really want to say it's so important, I think, to really get a handle on what is happening, with these homes that exist in the housing stock, and understand, and the community needs to understand how many of them we're losing, and also how many are being diverted to the rental, seasonal, short-term Airbnb market. So I don't know if you have stats, and I won't make you do it now, but I think really, Jeremy, I've talked about it, really understanding that, because we can't build our way out, but maybe we can unbuild our way out.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean. So I really hope that'll be focused on. And then, I don't know if you have time to answer, I would love to know, I know other communities have also gone to either a hospitality tax or more trying to tax the Airbnb, rentals, and I just would love to know if the community is thinking about trying to do something like that as another tool to raise funds. But thank you for all that you're doing. Really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Jane. Peter, and maybe Jay, if you want to pick on up on that.
You mentioned at the end of your comments Airbnb, and I do think that is a major factor in the disappearance of, affordable renting units within the town. I don't know the stats, but I think it's very significant. Whole areas of town that were able to supply year-round or even, winter rentals are now gone. And, we're looking at ways that we can address that specific issue. Short-term rentals, we already have laws on the books, as you know, Jane, that disallow the rental of a short term for more than twice in a 6-month period, and a short term is anything less than 2 weeks. So, we know that there are neighborhoods that are turning into Airbnb hotel areas, really, and code enforcement works hard to address that. I've added additional code enforcement in this year's budget, three new positions. And, we're also, I have a seminar that I'm attending about Airbnb. We've had some success with that. I think we have the highest fines ever levied against a very offensive, I think 57 violations of the rule,
Wow.
and it was into the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fines. But that's clearly an aspect that we have to address. I see now that our Deputy Supervisor, Kathy Burke-Gonzalez, is in the audience tonight, and she and I have talked about this issue particularly, and I think working together as a board, we've been very successful to address a number of these issues. It's going to take, again, all hands on housing in East Hampton to be able to address this, and I'm thankful to have a cooperative board to work with me.
Thank you. Now we're going to have one more question, and then I'm going to allow the panelists to have an opportunity to give up their closing thoughts.
So my name's Arian Chug. I'm a student at East Hampton High School, as Ms. Lownes mentioned. And just building off what she said and what you, Senator Palumbo, mentioned about retaining teachers, I actually spent last year conducting a research study on the effect that commutes have on teachers from the East End, which I defined as Hampton Bays to Montauk on the South Fork. And so I just have some stats here from that study that I surveyed over 160 teachers and interviewed over 40 of them. And so over 50%, 54.9% commute greater than 30 minutes every single day. 25% of those are between 60 and 90 minutes a day, which is beyond ridiculous for teachers to be dealing with on every single day. This impacts, as Ms. Lownes said, of extracurriculars, sports, clubs, class advisors. They can't be involved. They can't build relationships with their students. It impacts the school community. 62% of teachers with commutes greater than 30 minutes said that they experience significant financial pressure as a result of their commute alone, which means that their salary is not able to compensate for the gas prices that they're dealing with, the car maintenance, if you have a lease on your car, the miles that you're putting on it. So obviously there's a challenge with regard to schools. Personally, through my experience in East Hampton High School, my 10th grade year, both the principal and my chemistry teacher both came for 1 year and left because they couldn't deal with the commute every day. They took a job thinking it wouldn't be that bad and they couldn't do it. So I think what people have mentioned, and obviously we're here, is that it's too expensive for them to live closer. There's no reason to commute that great a distance if there was a better way to live out here. So I was just wondering if you guys have a plan specifically for education to make it more, and Matt mentioned the teachers' housing. Is there a plan like that in place to help teachers stay here and build our education? Because that's what really motivates people, is what our taxes are going to. As we mentioned, taxes are the big issue. Taxes are going to the schools, right? People care about their kids' education. And so I think that's really the way that we can motivate people to act on this. And so is there a plan to specifically help teachers?
Fred?
Well, first of all, you're going to give me the opportunity to kind of give a shout out to the East Hampton School District and the way that they've embraced this particular issue with regard to affordable housing. You know, sometimes, I think this shows that there's really been a change in attitude with regard to affordable housing out here. But a lot of times it would be school districts that would be opposing affordable housing projects because more affordable housing, more kids to educate, you know, more money that they have to raise to do that. East Hampton School District has taken exactly the opposite take, and they have been very affirmative in supporting the need for affordable housing and looking for options like you're talking about you know, whether it's shared equity or working, you know, the school district playing an affirmative role in doing this. So I think what I can say is that, you know, with the proposal that is on the ballot this November, those decisions will ultimately get decided between the town and the school districts. The law is written in a way that allows for those kind of partnerships to occur and for the funds from the Community Housing Fund to be able to be used, where the town can work with the school district and utilize these dollars for teacher housing, and those decisions will get made locally. But you know, we really drafted this law, and it was really from input that I got in drafting the bill from people like Katie Casey and Tom Rule and Curtis Highsmith in Southampton. And we ended up with a bill that provided as much flexibility. It wasn't the state saying this is how you have to spend the money. It was, here, prepare a plan, you know, decide what the best way to address this is. So those decisions, so I don't, as a state representative, I don't have that plan, but we drafted the bill in a way that, you know, the towns and the school districts can work together to put together that plan. And that's really how this will impact, this referendum would impact the issue that you're talking about.
Thank you. And Peter, you wanted to add to that, I think?
Well, I just want to add that, you know, something we haven't really talked about is the actual process. And, you know, the revenues are collected by, you know, the contribution of payment of the tax by the purchaser of real property. But that fund is administered by the town, and the legislation requires that a community housing fund committee, advisory committee be formed, and that it have specific people with specific backgrounds as members, such as bankers, builders, community housing advocates, et cetera. Committee has to be between 7 and 15 people. And much like the Community Preservation Fund's Water Quality Technical Advisory Committee, the committee will meet and discuss potential projects and based on their review and the vetting of those projects, make recommendations to the town board, who will then hold a public hearing, and the public will get, an opportunity to weigh in as well, and then, would take an affirmative vote of the town board in order to approve the funding for any project. The exception may be that certain aspects could be done administratively, such as first-time home buyer. If you qualify, that could be an administrative process. We don't need to burden the committee with that. But in terms of specifically targeting any one group that might need housing, I don't think we can do that. But certainly we know, who are the folks that need affordable housing. We're not talking about people who are indigent, have no jobs or income. We're talking about alone. We're talking about people who are gainfully employed and work hard and are vital in our community, whether they're nurses, teachers, plumbers, electricians, nurses, municipal workers, first responders. I mean, this is the core of our community. This is what makes things function. And so we absolutely have to figure out how to, provide housing for those critical people who are essential to our community.
Thank you, and thank you. Thank you.
Thank you guys for everything.
Now, again, I thought a lot of this, I had the advisory board breakdown and a few other things. I've never hosted a forum. I'm really glad that this went very well to the point where I have a lot of stuff I didn't cover. Please go home and go on the town's website. I read a 65-page document. You could skim through it during a football game, all right? So you could learn some stuff that I wasn't able to cover tonight. And I think that would be helpful as far as implementation, advisory board, et cetera. And then if you see these guys out in public, badger them. Go right ahead. I wanted to end and allow you guys to have your last thoughts, and then I'll wrap us up as we're hitting 8 o'clock. It's a Friday, and I want to be fair to everyone's time. So I don't know who wants to. The Mets do play in about 6 minutes, so I know Fred.
That was my condition for participating. Done before the Met game.
All right, so we'll start with Senator Anthony Palumbo and work our way down.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you to LTV and to Matt. I think everybody but Jessica should give him a round of applause for a wonderful forum.
Thank you.
This is great. And when I looked through your agenda, you did hit all these topics that we've at least gleaned over them. So excellent work. Thank you for inviting me. It's always nice to go. I don't think I'm taking the ferries either. I'll probably be home in about an hour and 20 minutes. It'll be a sample commute for our teachers who come out to East Hampton. But everyone enjoy your weekend, and certainly my office door is always open for anyone who has any further questions. And I just really appreciate being here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Fred?
Well, first of all, I want to thank LTV again for providing such a community service like they do so many times here in the town of East Hampton. And I certainly want to thank Matt, not just for his passion, which is obvious, but for turning that passion into action and really doing something affirmative to really change the direction of policy in the community in which he lives. And I really believe he deserves a round of applause.
Thank you. I wouldn't have let them have their final thoughts if I'd known it was going to be all about me.
Yeah, well, we could have started with that if you wanted. But, and finally, I just, again, want to urge people to vote yes on proposal number 3. And I don't know if I mentioned this before or not, but when you go to vote, please flip over the ballot. And don't forget to vote on the propositions. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend and enjoy the holiday. Thank you.
Thank you. Legislator Fleming?
Thank you, and I want to echo the thanks to LTV as well, and to everyone here who's in the audience who's working so hard on all these issues. I'm honored to be part of, to have been asked to join this group of really dedicated and committed bipartisan public officials who are trying to get, the job done for the community. you know, it's hard to make ends meet all across Long Island, and housing costs are one of the costs that we in government have to continue to look at. So very excited that there is this very concrete proposition number 3 that you want to vote yes on the ballot. Remember, you need to turn it over. Flip the ballot, sorry, flip the ballot. Amen. So anyway, thank you very much. It's critically important, really excited to be here with all these great folks, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Jay?
All right. Thank you to LTV. And Matt, thank you for hosting. You've done a great job. And Fred, thank you for bringing this really important piece of legislation forward. You know, Bridget mentioned a project in Scoyoc earlier that the community supported. It wasn't always supported, right? It was fought. The numbers had to get lower, and the subsidies had to get brought in to get the community to support it. And we were chasing money. Bridget got money at the county. The state attorney general was able to provide some money from the money they got from the banks after the collapse, the Great Recession. It was really a challenge. We don't have the source of money. It makes it really hard when land is so high. To make the numbers work, the densities would be too high for the community to accept. If we're really going to make progress on this issue, we need money to do it, whether it's helping somebody who's close to being able to buy a home but can't, but if they had that down payment assistance, or if the town could step in and take partial equity, we could do it. We could bring those numbers down to make the apartment, you know, that project, I hate that term, but we could make it happen if we had the funds. So it's really, as somebody who has been trying to do this from the governmental side and has, you know, faced the legal challenges and all that, it would be so much easier if we had a fund. I wish we had it 10 years ago. If this is a fraction as successful as the Community Preservation Fund has been in terms of retaining our landscape and rural character, if it's a fraction as successful in terms of retaining the people we need to sustain our communities, then this will be a great thing and it'll add to Fred's legacy. So I hope people do support it. It's really needed.
Thank you, Jay. And Peter?
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate this opportunity. Thank you for putting this together, and thank you, LTV, which is such an amazing asset to our community, bringing important issues of the day to the community. And in terms of important issues, I think this is the single most important issue that this town is facing right now. It's the most immediate threat to the survival and sustainability of our community as we know it. We've preserved, you know, thousands of acres of land and kept intact much of the historic nature of our town, but it's all meaningless if we can't have a sustainable and functioning community. And a functioning community means we need community members who are part of that function. And again, you know, we know that the people who we're talking about here are already in our community. We want to keep them in their community, and they're vital to our survival as we know it. So I'm dedicated to this proposition, and I feel thankful and lucky to be serving with other town board members who are also equally focused. It really is all hands on housing, and we look forward, again, asking people to vote on this ballot measure. I can't tell you which way to vote, but I think you know what we need to do.
I want to thank my panelists, and I want to thank everyone for coming. I'm going to leave you with one sentence. If not us, then who? Thank you.